everybody. And how are you? You're fine? You had a wonderful day? A good day?
Non-violent day.
So, how you know that your day was good?
What I said.
All right, good. All right. Well, tonight, I think you're starting a whole series. So I would like to start with intrapersonal violence. You know, we sing a song, "Let there be peace on earth." And what it says? Let it begin with me. So that's where I want to begin, with me. So let's look at intrapersonal violence, living a non-violent life, making peace with oneself, really. As an adjective, interpersonal is something that exists within us, within you, within me. Something happening, something occurring within the individual self and within the individual mind. Intrapersonal, we talk sometimes about intrapersonal skills, knowing what drives us, knowing our anger, knowing our motivations, knowing our frustrations, knowing what inspires us. That ability really to self-regulate, to control our emotions, that ability to forgive and to forget, that ability to stay calm, that ability to bounce back after setbacks. And you know, God is a wonderful God, right? A very wonderful God. And God doesn't fool us. God comes straight to the point, right? Very straight to the point. So we learned, and you learn in the catechism long time ago, when Jesus was asked, what is the greatest commandment? You remember the answer to that? The greatest commandment is to do what? All your soul and with all your mind, right? And then there is a commandment that resembles it. And what is that commandment? Love your neighbor. Love your neighbor what? As yourself. As yourself. Right? So Jesus wasn't foolish at all. I think I prefer to use that. Holding this thing. So you can go, yeah. Yes. I kind of prefer that. I'll rest it here. Too much trouble. Is there a feedback? So, Father, you want to adjust it? It's okay now? All right. So, God gave us a gauge, a measurement, and that is love your neighbor as yourself. Because it's very easy for us to get into games. It's very easy for us to fool ourselves. Isn't that so? Very, very easy. I get into games easily. I don't know about you, but we could get into games easily. So, when Jesus was asked, what was this greatest commandment? And he said, you know, to love your neighbor, to love God with your whole heart, your whole soul, your whole mind. And he went on in Matthew's gospel. Love God with your entire being, that entire self, heart, soul. And the touchstone of this truth of our love of God is the love of neighbor. And that touchstone, he gives us this measurement to love neighbor as you love self. But this is, I would call it the rub of the thing. This is the real test to love neighbor as you love self. We don't really love ourselves. We may say that. But I think that is one of the biggest struggle That's one of the biggest journeys, one of the longest journeys. I always say that, to my mind, when we talk about original sin, we're really talking about the loss of our sense of that love that God pronounced us, said about us, that you're good, you're lovable, I delight in you, you are precious. I think when we lose that sense of being precious to God, when we lose that sense of God's unconditional love for us, when we lose that sense of I have redeemed you, I have created you, I have called you, I have chosen you, I think when we lose that sense, I think then is when we could really talk about original sin. Because the original blessing was exactly that. The original blessing is that you were pronounced good. You were pronounced saved, redeemed, called, chosen, loved, and finally, I delight in you. You are precious and you are mine.
Amen.
I think that when we lose that sense of preciousness, when we lose that sense of being loved, and we go looking for it in all kinds of places and funny places and doing all kinds of things, then I think we're dabbling with sin. The Holy Father says something that I was really struck by in the last chapter of Laudato Si. He says, when there is an empty heart, and I'm paraphrasing here, when we have an empty heart, we go looking for all kinds of things. All kinds of things. And he lists them out. You know, he likes to list things. Right? But when we have an empty heart, we go looking for all kinds of things. I think I'm talking about the same idea. That Jesus gave us this absolute priority to love as the path to our own health, our own holiness, our own wholeness, and our own well-being. I think sometimes it is hard for us to internalize that sense of God's unconditional love. It's very easy for us to talk and to say, that I am the temple of the Spirit. It's very easy for us to say that. But the criterion of how we love our neighbor is the love we have for ourselves. Our neighbor, if that is the criterion, our neighbor might be in real trouble. How do we love ourselves? In order to love neighbor as self, we must first love self. But often we don't. Living a non-violent life first means loving ourselves. First means loving ourselves. If we are going to live a non-violent life. It means first accepting ourselves as gift. Ask yourself, when you give a gift, why you give a gift? What you want to express? What you want to message? What you want to say? You want to say that you care. You want to say that you love. You want to say that you appreciate. You want to show gratitude. You want to show what? You want to celebrate the person. You want to say thanks. There's so many things that you express when you give a gift. Well, what are you? And who are you? Aren't you a gift? You're a gift. And in God giving you yourself, God was trying to say all of that. I appreciate you. I love you. I thank you. All of that. Just think about if you would give somebody a gift and they never would have opened it. So next Christmas. Christmas is coming in a couple months. But the gift wasn't opened. The gift wasn't opened. It wasn't explored. It wasn't used. The gift was just put there. Tell me something. When you say thanks for a gift that you got, but you didn't open, and you put there, that thanks is meaningful? Is that thanks meaningful? Is that thanks an act of gratitude? Or is it saying for saying sake? And what happens when you open the gift and you don't like it? And you give it away? Or you discard it? Or you throw it? Or you abandon it? What happens? What happens? Well, sometimes, we have done that. Sometimes we have done that. That is violence. That is violence. Even a lack of gratitude for express love is violence. A non-violent life causes us to celebrate, to be grateful, to be gracious. It means first accepting this self as gift, seeing our unique worth and our value. However, we do so much violence to ourselves by looking just at what? If you have a gift, you look at its value. You look at its beauty. Right? You look at its use. You start thinking about ways in which you can preserve it, save it, use it but don't abuse it. You think about all those things, don't you? I hope I'm not the only mad one in the room. But that's what I think about when I'm given a gift. Right? But just think about that. Just think about that. Many, many times, what do we concentrate on? We concentrate on our flaws. We concentrate on what? Our weaknesses. We concentrate on our limitations. We concentrate on our unworthiness. What else we concentrate on? You know them. You could help me name them. Mistakes. Failures. Thank you, Ian. We concentrate on that. We talk about ourselves in harsh and condemning language. That's violence. That's violence. We often so dislike the person whom we find ourselves to be that we take on roles and we play roles that seem more acceptable. In order to live a non-violent life, we need to learn 4 things, I would say, in terms of the intrapersonal. We need to believe God's love for us. We really need to believe God's love for us. We need to accept the love of others. We need to practice behaviors that produce self-respect if we're going to live a non-violent life. We need to avoid situations that are hazardous to our own self-growth and our self-esteem and our self-confidence. If we're going to live, firstly, in our own lives, a non-violent life. Believing in God's love. Our faith as Christians is based on God's love for us. In John's Gospel, chapter 3, verse 16, for this is how God loved the world. He gave his only Son, so that everyone who believes in him may not perish, but have eternal life. Do you believe that God loves you, knows you, cherishes you, delights in you. You know, it's really, really not easy. I say that from many perspectives. Once I went to a particular school, and I thought I would do something radical. So I gave everybody an A to begin with. Everybody got an A. And I said to them, I want you to do this. Write 3 things down for me. 1, why you deserve an A. 2, what you're going to do to keep your A. And 3, what you're going to do to get it from an A to an A+. Because my assumption is nobody A will change apart from becoming an A+. It was a sad day for me. Would you believe there were children that didn't believe that they deserve an A? Do you believe that every single reason they gave me for maintaining their A, that if I was really radical, I would have told them no way? They would get an A, they'd keep their A because they would keep quiet. They would keep quiet. They would listen to me. They would obey me. That's how they would maintain their A. And only one person in a class of 36 felt that they could do something different and get an A+. Well, needless to say, I went to the school principal and I said, I would like to speak to your teachers. But it tells us something very fundamental about us. That we don't see ourselves as participating and engaging. We don't see ourselves as partners. We see ourselves most times as just docile, accepting creatures. It's like life happened to us, but we don't make life happen. That is violent, you know. That is violent. So we make ourselves a victim of circumstances. That's violence. We don't feel we could change anything. But you know, you have to believe that you could change something in order for you to get to the place of making a pledge. You have to believe that things could be different, and you have to believe that you have the power to make it different and to make a difference. You have to believe that. And you have to believe that not only on your power, but you have to believe that the God who loves you has empowered you to be a partner with him in the works of good, in the furthering of the mission, in the proclamation of the gospel. It just doesn't happen. Just so. Just so. To believe God's love for us, we have to be willing also to accept the love of others. To practice behaviors, as I said, that produce self-respect. To avoid situations that are hazardous. You know, many times, we have violent images of God. And you have to ask yourself where those violent images of God come from? And that's because we too have violent images of ourselves, and we project that on God. I came to realize that very forcefully when I worked in St. Lucia at our hospital in pastoral care. That people who are afraid to die, and many, many were afraid to die, because they were stuck in believing in a God that had some little black book or some long, long memory that wrote down every single thing that they did. That they did. I remember going to give communion to a man, and he said, "Sister, you can't come into my room." And I asked why. And he said, "Sister, you don't know my life." And I said to him, today I would have said something different, but I said to him, your life can be bigger than God's mercy. Amen. Your life cannot be so bad that God's love can't touch it. But we project these images on God. We find it almost impossible to picture God holding us on the palm of his hands. We find it almost crazy to think of a God that relinquishes. Yet all of that we find in Scripture. A God that relents. A God that forgets. Because you know why? We have memories like elephants. We remember everything. Everything. And we find it very difficult to relent. We find it very difficult to forgive ourselves. So if we find it difficult to forgive ourselves, it is almost impossible to believe in the forgiveness of God. Brothers and sisters, that's violence. To live a non-violent life, we need to pray daily. We need to ask this loving God of us for a miracle. You know, as the man brought his son, and he said to Jesus, you know, I have faith, but do what?
Help my unbelief.
Right. You know, I think we need to pray a similar prayer for a similar miracle. The miracle must be, Lord, I want to trust in your love. Sometimes I have a little sense that you love me, but convince me, convict me in your love for me. Let me know your unconditional love as I know my breath. Let me feel your unconditional love as I feel my skin. Let me know it without a doubt. Because, you know, when we don't know that unconditional love of God, we're very hard on ourselves. We're very harsh on ourselves. And I don't know people that are harsh on themselves and are not harsh with other people. When we know the unconditional love of God, we could suffer in a redemptive way. People who do not know the unconditional love of God, suffering embitters them. Because they see their suffering as punishment for something they have done. Or something they still need to do. And you know, I always say, the icon of every Christian is suffering. We will all suffer. That's the mold. But you know, not all of us will suffer in a way that will make us more Christ-like. That is a tragedy. That is a tragedy. Some of us suffer, and that suffer even makes us violent, rather than making us more compassionate, more giving, more yielding, more understanding, more empathic. It is a particular kind of perspective that we hold that causes us to go one way or the other. One way or the other. You ever heard yourself say, God, what I did now, I'm suffering so? You ever heard yourself say that? Or you ever heard yourself experiencing, you're experiencing blessings and good things, and you say to yourself, I wonder what to follow? I wonder what will follow? That is a fundamental statement of mistrusting God's goodness. That's a fundamental statement. Belief in not trusting God. That you believe that God is some bribing man up in the sky. That God is some manipulator of human feelings. That God is somebody who balances a checkbook, the checkbook of our life. You do this, I take away this from you. You do this, I give you this. That is so punitive. That is so punitive. How could we believe that? Of someone who has come that we should have life and have it to the full.
Amen.
How we could put that on to a God that loves us unconditionally. How could we put that on? What a loving God is able to do for us is to help us with our experiences of doubt, of fear. Especially the kind of crippling doubt that erodes our hope, that causes us almost to live on the brink of despair. That too is violent. We need to share with God our difficulty of believing and accepting that tremendous love, that prodigal kind of love that He has for us. I have come to believe that you can only love yourself as you have, to the degree that you have internalized a sense of God's love for you. I have come to believe that in my own life. That you could really only truly love yourself to the degree that you have internalized a sense of God's love for you. And I think that is a challenge for us as Christians. A real challenge. To really try to internalize that sense of God's love for us. And that is not no excuse. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying you don't have to look at sin. I think if you look at the lives of the saints, more they fell in love with God, more intimate they grew in their intimacy with God, is more they saw their sinfulness. But they did not see their sinfulness in a way that God could not lift them up, that God could not raise them. Even Mother Teresa, Saint Teresa of Calcutta, in her darkest moment, when she didn't have a sense of this God that she was serving, she knew something deep down in her heart. She believed that He loved her and he called her. And she could hope in that, even though she couldn't put out her hand and feel something, even though she didn't hear a voice, and even though she did not know it humanly speaking. It kept her going. You see, there is a relationship between that and learning to accept the love of others. In order to accept yourself, myself, we need to accept the love of other people. Yet, it is precisely because we live such self-deprecating lives, such lives of, I would say, self-violence, because we do not value ourselves, it becomes very difficult to receive affirmation from other people. Very difficult. Words of respect and admiration or awe is not matched somehow to the image we have of ourselves as dismissive, distrusting. But we do need expressions of genuine regard, of genuine love, in order to help deal with the negative attitudes we have to ourselves and the negative, violent, abusive comments that sometimes we even make about ourselves. It's so easy to get into. It's so easy to get into. I try to live what I preach, and maybe that's why I preach it so hard. They say that you preach loud is what you need to learn most. Well, I went to the market to shop. So I came home with lettuce and carrots, all those kinds of things. And the car keys, of course. And I had to go out and I couldn't find the car keys, right? So I was looking for the car keys. So I said to myself, Julie, retrace your steps. So I retraced my steps. And the last place I went was the refrigerator. And obviously, the keys are sitting on top of the lettuce in the refrigerator. And the first thing I said to myself is, you stupid Julie. And no, immediately I changed that. And I said, no, you're sensible. That's why you knew you had to retrace your steps. Because I'm trying to work on this violent thing in me. I'm trying to work on this violent language. I'm trying to work on this self-deprecating kind of things that I say about myself and say to myself. I'm really trying hard to work on it. I never knew, I was telling Rhonda, I think a couple of weeks ago, I never knew I had so much violence in me. I speak to myself in violent ways. If I turn around and call myself stupid, you know what I'll tell your sons and daughters when I get to St. Mary's College and St. Joseph's Convent and Providence? I will call them stupid too. I won't be able to be in a place where I'm saying to them, you know something? You were smart. That's why you knew you had to go back. And look. So, I'm not telling you rocket science, but I'm telling you something that's very challenging. It's hard to do self-work, but that is where peace begins. Amen. It begins with self-work. You know how many times you've told somebody in your own house, you've told them something that is affirming, something that's encouraging, and the response is, you really mean that? That ain't so good. They just can't take it. There isn't something there for it to resonate with. But we do need expressions of genuine regard to just help us deal a lot with the violence we have towards ourselves. To live a non-violent life, we need affirmation as we need oxygen. I'm very convinced that the need to absorb love and respect is essential in learning, self-acceptance, and is synonymous with learning a non-violent way of life. Maybe our most challenging task, and maybe my most challenging task as a therapist sometimes, is to invite client to drink in expressions of respect, of affection. As they were drinking, I would say, a cool drink on a very hot day when they're thirsty. Because, somehow, if the violence in us is not quenched with gentleness, with love, with a sense of our goodness and how God made us good, if that isn't quenched, if that violence in us, if that harshness in us is not quenched with those things, we continue to be harsh. We continue to be violent. We continue to not appreciate who we are. And therefore, when we speak about interpersonal violence, we're going to see how that affects other people. If our anger is not quenched by love, or wrongdoing not quenched by forgiveness and acceptance, we continue to live violence towards ourselves. We in turn hate and disrespect ourselves. I will encourage people sometimes to observe statements of trust. Listen to the trust that you're hearing here. Listen to the warmth, the admiration. Allow those experiences to bathe you or sunbathe your face so that you could become somebody different. It could smooth over that harshness, that self-dislike, that violent self-response. But sometimes I think as Catholics, and maybe just Christians, period, we have this misguided humility, this distorted sense, as if we claim good and we see our own goodness is like we detract from God. But I think when we see our goodness, we don't detract from God. You, as St. Paul says, you recognize where it came from. There is nothing that you have that you have given to yourself. You recognize where it came from. You recognize the priority. But to celebrate yourself is not to detract from God. It's to celebrate God's goodness in you.
Amen. Amen.
And if you cannot celebrate yourself, then your thanks to God sometimes limp. It's not as authentic. It's not as true. Sometimes you say something and you believe it, and sometimes you say something because you have to say it. Sometimes I think a lot of prayers have to change from the latter. Saying something because you have to say it. I find myself regularly praying for prayer not to become a routine, not to become something I have to do, but something I desire and want to do. There's a big difference when you say, I have to meet somebody. I must go and meet my friend. Else you're going to be vexed. He's going to be upset. Then when you say, I promise to meet my friend and I would like to get there on time. And I know if I don't get there in time, my friend will understand. It's a whole different ballpark. And I think that's where we have to get to in the way that we pray and relate to ourselves and to God. Practicing behaviors that produce self-respect. Every day we act in ways that foster feelings of peace by acting in self-respect, or we behave in ways that demean us. We can eat too much, drink too much, cuss too much, and we know how we feel about those things. Or we can treat ourselves as we want to be treated, as we think we deserve to be treated. But if we feel, well, this is how it is, I don't care, then we take on behaviors that are violent and disrespectful. But if we believe that this body of ours is given to us by God, and we genuinely could say it is the temple of the Spirit, then we act towards it differently. Each action we choose is an action that enhances that sense, that causes us to act more as children of God rather than agents of the evil one. Avoiding behaviors that are hazardous to us and our own growth. Growth in appreciation and positive regard for ourselves in non-violent ways, by choosing non-violent ways of living. However, these things are very, very demanding. You know, if we really live on the side where we really don't appreciate ourselves, we put ourselves in very toxic situations. But if we really value ourselves and value this gift that God has given us, then we don't put ourselves in toxic situations. We don't put ourselves in those situations. We speak up for ourselves. You know, even when they were jeering to Christ at his passion, just look at his responses. Rejecting those situations. Rejecting those situations. So are you the king of the Jews? Think of his answer. Right. It's very, very interesting. Very, very interesting. You said it. A way of not taking on the jeer of other people. Relationships in which we are not valued and appreciated destroys our confidence. Jobs in which we are demeaned fosters feelings of inferiority. And when we have those feelings, brothers and sisters, you know as well as I do, you can't have those feelings and not have violent thoughts. And have violent feelings likewise. You know that. You know that. When family dynamics and expectations, are those that force us to infantile roles, stymie our growth, it generates feelings of dislike. It generates rage in us. We have the responsibility to avoid these situations that fuel self-hate and self-violence, that degrade us from our own self-worth. Self-worth is hard to build, but it's easy to trample on. Very easy to trample on. Jesus is a model for us in terms of his example. His example can guide us and encourage us. He trusted in his Father's love. We know that. He accepted and respected his Father's love. He respected and accepted the love that others gave to him. He avoided toxic settings. In John's Gospel, chapter 3, verse 35, what we read there, the Father loved his Son and entrusted everything to him. In chapter 10, what we read there, the Father loves me because I lay down my life. So there's a conviction that you read all the time. In chapter 15, verse 9, I have loved you just as the Father has loved me. He taught his disciples how to avoid toxic situations. You go into a town and they don't welcome you. What do? You hang around and take the abuse? You offer them my words and they're not taking it. You don't throw pearls before swines. You dust the feet and you walk out. Just ask yourself. Just ask yourself. So, I want to end with a story. I'm not going to read the whole story for you because I want you to go read the story yourself. But it's the story of the taming of the wolf. St. Francis making peace with the wolf and the people of Gubbio. So in the book, The Little Flower of St. Francis, there's a time when Francis was staying in the town of Gubbio, and something wonderful and worthwhile was happening. But there appeared in that same territory a fearful large wolf. And that wolf was very hungry. So it started to devour the animals, and the wolf even killed human beings. So all the people in the town, they were very upset. They were afraid of the terror. And they were afraid that this wolf would come nearer and nearer to them. So they took up weapons. They got weapons. They armed themselves so that they could kill this wolf. Consequently, everybody in the town was so terrified that they were even moving out of the city gate. But God wished, according to the fable, to bring a difference to Gubbio. So it was brought to Francis's attention that the people were fleeing, and those who remained had all of these weapons. So the saint, he went down to Gubbio, and he said so everybody was saying, Francis, don't go, Francis, don't go. But Francis went. And he went to the wolf. And what did Francis do? When the peasants were saying to him, don't go. We don't want you to go further than that. Stay right here. Just stay here. But Francis wouldn't listen. Francis went down with his companions. The saint, Francis, made a sign of the cross towards the wolf. Then in the sight of all the people, he climbed up on a place where he really could see the wolf running. And his companions, obviously, you know what they did to Jesus. They left him too, right? But the saint made the sign of the cross again. And he called on the power of God. And Francis said to the wolf, Brother Wolf, you have done great harm to this region, and you have committed a horrible crime by destroying God's creatures without any mercy. You have been destroying not only irrational animals, but even you have made some very grave, detestable things by killing people, devouring human beings that were made in the image and likeness of God. You therefore deserve to be put to death because you acted worse than a robber. And Francis goes on and he has this conversation with the wolf. And we're told in the story that the wolf literally gave Francis his paw. And the wolf made peace. And Francis said to him, Brother Wolf, since you are willing to keep this peace pact, I promise that I will have the people of this town give you food every day as long as you live, so that you may never again suffer from hunger. For I know that whatever evil you have been doing was done because it was urged by hunger. But, Brother Wolf, since I am obtaining such a favor for you, I want you to promise that you will never hurt them again. And then Francis continues to keep the talk with the wolf. All right? And then Francis went to the people now, because he had made the pledge with the wolf, and the wolf had made the pledge with him that he will not destroy the people. And Francis asked the people to feed the wolf because it was the wolf's hunger that was driving him to that. But then Francis went to something that I think is instructive to us. Francis asked the people, what is the wolf in you? The wolf was hungry, and the wolf, because of its hunger, was searching for food and devoured animals, and eventually started to devour you. What in you caused you to pick up weapons? What in us caused us to pick up weapons? What is the wolf in us? I wonder why the people didn't think of feeding the wolf. Why wasn't that their first response? To feed the wolf. I leave you with this. I want you to go get the flower, the little flower of St. Francis, read the story or Google it, read it, and just think of it. Think of it. Think of it from both sides. What's harsh to you? What wants to devour you because of the genuine hunger? What is unsatisfied also in you that is devouring you, devouring me? What are my wolves? Do I know them? Are they enabling me to live a non-violent life? Or do they have me stuck in a place of violence? If I have to become a peacemaker, I have to be willing to look at both sides. If you're going to take a pledge and pray about it, to take a pledge at the end of this month, these are all things for us to begin to consider. This is serious. This is not just one of Rhonda's crazy ideas. This is not just one of Sister Julie's crazy ideas. Look at the weekend we just had. Just look at the weekend we just had. I don't even ask you to go far back in your memory. Just look at this past weekend. And ask yourself, would you be doing yourself a favor, Trinidad a favor? Would you be living more like a Christian? Would you be evangelizing more by your life and by your choices? Would you dare to make a difference by becoming a peacemaker, starting with yourself? Or do you believe it has gone too far, and therefore the best is to pick up weapons and to leave the city? I thank you. God bless you.